Hello humans! I know I promised you a new video about the horrors of fantasy settings, but I've been very sick the past couple weeks and struggling with some sleep problems and anxiety, and so I was unable to put that together for you in a timely fashion. I am now starting to feel a little bit better, and my sleep is starting to get normal again, so hopefully I'll have that done in another 2 to 3 weeks for you. Aiming for 2. In the meantime, I saw this as an opportunity to apologize and to talk to you about something that affects me and to tell you a very scary story about how easy it is to lose touch with reality. Some people might already know this about me, but I have some sleep issues. I'm not really an insomniac, I'm just a night owl who makes bad life decisions. I have different sleep issues. I have night terrors, really vivid nightmares. Sometimes when I first wake up, I have pretty wild hallucinations, and I have also experienced a few episodes of true sleep paralysis. I am not an expert on sleep disorders, and this is not a scientific deep dive into sleep disorders or any of the things that I just listed. I am going to talk to you about my personal experience with these things, and I'm going to be focusing on about a 3-week span that occurred last year, actually around this time. It started when I woke up one night and saw a shadow person in the corner of my bedroom. He was as tall as the ceiling and stood directly at the meeting of the walls, the 90-degree junction right there. I could make out a torso, legs, arms. I got the impression he was wearing some sort of cloak, but he seemed to cut off at the shoulders, lacking both a neck and a head, which did not stop him from talking, unfortunately, or rather yelling. He yelled in German, or whatever nonsense language my mind vomited up because it thought it sounded enough like German. And in my hallucination, I believed that I began to speak German as well. In fact, everything he said, I began to echo. As I echoed him, I began to catch up. The gap between his speaking and my speaking was shrinking. And somehow I knew that if I started saying the same thing he did at the same time, when our syllables finally overlapped, he would take possession of my body, and my ego, or whatever consciousness is, would be thrown either into the void or into a hellish shadow realm. Now, I couldn't move, which is typical of a sleep paralysis episode, but I could sort of worm my torso around a little bit and sort of twist my shoulders, and I was trying to flop myself out of bed or sit upright or just do anything, but I couldn't. And he kept hammering out these German syllables, and my lips kept moving without my telling them to, and I kept catching up to him. And I knew what would happen when I did. Finally, I sat bolt upright in bed and screamed, "No!" so loudly I woke up all my roommates. The German demon shadow was gone, of course, because it was not real, and my room was empty, but I couldn't get back to sleep. The next couple nights, I avoided sleeping. I feel very helpless sleeping, because you are helpless when you're asleep, and the act of going to sleep gives me kind of a vague anxiety to begin with. So it's very easy for me to talk myself out of it, especially if there's something fun to do. And also especially if I'm scared about being possessed by a demon shadow and having my consciousness ripped out of me and banished to a shadow hell. Is any of that real? Absolutely not. But hallucinations always feel real when you're having them. And sometimes it can be very difficult to talk yourself out of these things with rationality alone. Of course, you know, not sleeping can have some pretty drastic psychological effects of its own. I slowed down a lot at work, and with my writing and other creative endeavors, I drifted away during conversations. But there was also no way in hell I was getting in bed too long before the sun came up. If reality gave me the option, I would probably have become straight up nocturnal. Alas, I just started settling for about 4 hours of sleep every night. Later that week, and some of the timetables here are very approximate. I was not sleeping back then. I have not been sleeping lately, though for less horrifying reasons. Anyway, later that week, another shadow visited me. And this one I knew, and I'm not sure how common this is with this sort of thing, but I do have a couple, I guess you'd call them recurring cast members among my nightmares, hallucinations, and sleep paralysis episodes. This one is called the Deep Man. And he doesn't scare me as much because I know the Deep Man, and I know what the Deep Man wants. He wants me to kill myself. He stands at the foot of my bed, wheezes. He's very phlegmatic, heavy, laborsome breaths. And he doesn't say much. He doesn't speak frequently. But when he does, it's always terrible stuff, like how he could disappear me whenever he felt like it, and nobody would notice for a long time because nobody cares that I'm alive, or how he could eat all my dreams and, like, rig my life to fail. Stuff like that. Very blah, blah, blah. We've all heard it. This time, I don't think he said anything, or nothing I remember, but I knew his silhouette. He has these hunched shoulders and this sort of drooped head. And he's got these coats. But also he's a shadow, and shadows lack detail. So how do I know what he looks like, really? Probably I know it because he just lives inside of my head. It's like the same way you know stuff in dreams. You just do, because it's there. It's not real. But that night, he just stood there, wheezing and staring. Not so scary, just a little off-putting. Another reason not to go to sleep. Then I woke up. The next week started with dreams so vivid, I began to wonder if they were visions. I saw 4 black birds, wings broken, necks snapped, laid out wingtip to wingtip in almost a diamond-like formation, with an empty bird's nest in between their feet. They were laid out on the only patch of dead yellow grass in a span of otherwise emerald green. Their feet were bound together with thin strands of aluminum wire. When I had this dream, I woke up the next day, and I'm not an artist, but I did that. I also dreamt of this white sedan driving down the street of a really economically distressed area, and all the kids ran from it, and all the adults just watched it go by. I don't know why that frightened me. In the last dream, I was watching a woman enter sort of a out-of-the-way area in some sort of a rural town. She looked scared and sad, and she saw something. She was approaching me, but she was looking at me like I was not, me. And she put her hand over her mouth when she got close, like she was about to scream. And that's when I woke up. And because I had all 3 dreams on the same night, I had a vague sense that they might be connected. They weren't, of course, because that's not how real life works, but not sleeping for a week and being enveloped in hallucinations put me in a vulnerable position to begin believing some unreal things. A couple nights later, I had another dream. This one's actually a recurring dream. I've had it many, many, many times. I don't consider it any kind of particularly vivid nightmare or night terror. I just have this dream sometimes, but because of the timing, it felt different this time. In this dream, a group of friends and I walk through the city that's been built out of these piled up crypts and mausoleums. I call it Crypt City because, for a writer, I am sometimes not terribly creative. The towers are tall. It's like a Manhattan built out of graves. And it's populated by skeletons, ghouls, ghosts, strange screeching spirits. Dead. Undead and dead things live there. But they don't attack us or anything in the dream. They just watch us as we walk through their city. I get the impression we're not particularly welcome to stay, but they allow us to pass through. Ahead of us, we see a light bobbing around an underground lake, which was our goal. That's the goal of the journey. That was why we were passing through the city. But when we get there, all we find is this incredibly ancient, frail old woman. She has this staff with a lantern hanging off of it, and she's just pacing around this, almost a campsite, I guess. And when we get to her, she grabs me with these long, like skeletal fingers and pulls me right into her face. And she rasps, "You came this far to learn the truth, didn't you?" And I'm like, I don't know, I guess. And she bends forward. She like brings me in, and her lips get right next to my ear, and she says, "The truth is..." I never remember. But whatever she says, whatever the truth is, after she says it, she crumbles into dust and ash and ground up bones. And I'm covered in her. And that's when I wake up. Usually I have this dream. It's recurring, it's frequent. I shrug it off pretty easily. But because of everything else that was happening at the time, and because I had already gone probably 10 days, sleeping 40 hours total, it felt heavier this time, more real, felt tied into everything, you know? And I felt for some reason like I was so close to finally remembering what she tells me. And I, for some reason, thought if I could only remember it, it would protect me from the others. Also, I started to think of these shadow people as the others. So, I think it was the end of the second week when I had another sleep paralysis episode. This one wasn't terrible, it was just unnerving, and in the context of everything else, it worried me. I woke in my bed, surrounded by shadow people. At least a dozen of them, probably more. They didn't do anything. They didn't say anything. They just stood there, staring down at me. I couldn't move. They didn't move. Nothing happened for a really long time, and it was terrifying to me. It felt like they were there for a reason. It felt like they were observing. Like they were witnesses to some process. Eventually, I guess I woke up, or the hallucination, the episode ended. I don't really remember. A few nights after that, I'm not sure exactly how long. Again, I wasn't sleeping at the time, and I haven't been sleeping recently for completely unrelated reasons. But a few nights after that, I got another visit from the German possession demon shadow thing. I won't put you through the rigmarole of describing the blow-by-blow this time, except that I felt like he was closer. Like he might succeed at taking me. The time I when I bolted up, I spilled out of my bed, and I was out of my room even, and I was just screaming, "Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you!" over and over and over again. So, yeah, living with me is pretty fun. That third and final week I want to talk to you guys about, I felt more like the narrator of a Lovecraftian horror story than at any other time of my life. For most of my life, these episodes have occurred months apart from each other, not days apart from each other. For instance, in the year 2019, I have had 2 episodes, period. And it is almost September. Having all of these things back to back to back over such a short period of time began to feel like a sign. Of what? I couldn't tell you, because, of course, it wasn't real, but it felt that way. I, of course, kept it a secret, because I knew the people around me wouldn't understand, which sounds familiar, right? I absolutely sounded like a conspiracy theorist, or the person who turns out to be right in every horror movie. And it was the second role that I began to believe defined me, because I hadn't slept in weeks, and I kept having hallucinations. The ending of a story is an important part of a story. It's the part where everything really comes together, where all of the disparate story elements finally make sense. This story ends like this. One night, I was so exhausted, I passed out on the couch, and I slept for 8 uninterrupted hours. The night after that, pretty much I did the same thing, except in my bed. And the night after that, and the night after that. I didn't have another episode for months. The story ends because the dreams and hallucinations and sleep paralysis episodes stopped. Without the stimuli to fuel my paranoia and my growing delusion, I stopped feeling so paranoid, and I became less deluded. Within a week or so, I was probably more or less back to normal. I did keep all of the notes I took. One, because I also have a bunch of actual writing in my notebook, and 2, because I honestly did think it might make a pretty cool book. But the problem I ran into with turning these hallucinatory, harrowing experiences into a book was the same problem I had trying to fit them together in real life. These things aren't connected. The birds and the car, the German demon shadow, the deep man, the warehouse out in the vast, they have no attachment to each other. They were all just things my brain churned out because my brain is in some ways just broken. I created the attachments and I created the connections because it gave me a sense of context and agency within experiences that were otherwise empty of context or agency. For me, part of the fun of writing in fantasy, sci-fi, and horror genres is the act of pulling the metaphorical and impossible and insane, like these shadow people and these visions, into the world of the material, the physical, the same. But in this case, there was nothing to pull. There was no connection, no attachment between the plot items. And besides, everyone knows the "it was a dream the whole time" ending is a stupid ending. Anyway, sorry I don't have the planned video to show you. I will have it soon, but I do hope this little personal tale gives you some form of amusement or satisfaction. Just a little glimpse behind the curtain. It was certainly an experience to live through. It was frightening, but also educational. It alerted me to how close I could be, or at how close anyone might be, to earnestly believing in impossible things. All it might take is a series of frightening events, the wrong sequence of traumas, the intermingling of hallucination with reality, and all the human mind can really do is make the best sense it can out of the stimuli available to it. In many ways, we are all just the victims of our perceptions. Our senses and our interpretation of our senses define our reality. Our rationality does not. Well, that's all the time we have today, folks. Take care of yourself, okay? And remember, get some sleep. Right, bottom buttons. So like, share, subscribe, social media me, baby. Yeah. Oh, and remember to pre-order my book, The War Beneath. There are no shadow people in it.